it was first proposed to me, and I thought it was a really interesting prompt. And so we'll see kind of what we dive into today. So as was said, my name is Ashleigh Hala. I'm an associate dean, the chief wellness officer at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts in the beautiful Berkshires of Western Massachusetts. I'm a social worker. And I've been in higher education for about 16 years. And oversight of a substance use misuse portfolio has been a part of my work for a while. And so again, excited to be with this community. So our agenda for today, kind of our roadmap, we're going to think about this prompt of the why and the how. And we're going to talk about some tools to figure out how to get there. We're going to look at some brief overview of some current data from the NCHA. If you are not familiar, we're going to introduce this concept of a needs assessment, which is sort of a tool to embody strategy. We're going to talk a little bit about what strategic and evidence-based interventions could look like, and then we'll just close out for the day. So you'll see here our session abstract. What was used, an effective prevention strategy is evidence-based and acknowledges the why and the how of addressing substance misuse among college students. So we're going to look at data, needs assessment, interventions with high efficacy to hopefully understand the purpose and practice of evidence-based prevention efforts. And so what I hope you're able to take from this today are these three things here, and a little bit of exposure to some current, most current data that we have from the NCHA, figuring out how to move from data into a needs assessment, and then figuring out how to move from a needs assessment into intervention, and programmatically what we do strategically. So hopefully that'll all come together nicely. So this idea of the why and how, for me, it really comes down to the dream and the operationalization, right? I was actually talking to someone about this concept of exploring these big questions, especially the why question. And what they said to me was something that has stuck with me since, and that is that it was the I have a dream speech, not the I have a plan speech. And so it starts somewhere with a dream, with aspirations, with the why, and then we get to the how. And so in that spirit, what we're going to look at really briefly is just a little bit on what why and how tend to look like in higher education, and where that tends to live is in this idea of visioning and missioning, right? And so what you'll see here just kind of describes those two things for you. So the first piece is the vision. That's really the aspirational sort of statement, the what's possible, what's the ideal. And then we have the mission sort of overlaying that, which is what will you do? How will you do it? It's very concrete. And then, of course, one thing I appreciate about this image is that you need to also have a concept of everything that influences you. What it says here is internal and external factors. So what are the environmental, political, contextual pieces that need to be a part of this Venn diagram in order for you to create that why and that how in a way that makes sense for you? So we start with this why, right? And I love some of these guiding questions, and I want you to think about your work in substance use programming with college students, and think about, okay, what would a visioning process and practice look like for the work that we do? So when you think about the work that you do, what is your ideal? Who do you want to be? What would you like to achieve? What about your values and your priorities? What impact will you have with your community? And you put all of that together, and it creates something inspiring and allows us to articulate, in the best of worlds, this is what we strive to do. And that piece of aspiration and inspiration is often a little bit of what keeps us going. So I think that having a vision statement is actually really powerful, even if it doesn't necessarily represent the day-to-day work that we're doing. It defines who we hope to be, which, to be real, is part of why I come into work every day. And I'm sure that resonates for some of you as well. The mission, like I said, yep. think that somebody just unmuted, that's okay. The vision, as I said, is much more concrete, right? It really is, what exactly are we gonna do? So you know that really inspirational, aspirational vision you just said? How are we gonna do it? What does our work look like every single day? Who do we serve? Who's on our staff? And we did talk a little bit about aspirational benefit or impact. What is our expected benefit or impact? So as an example, our vision statement might include something like, uh, zero um, incidents of hospitalizations due to alcohol use. Whereas a mission might be 50% reduction in, like, it's a matter of looking at the aspirational versus the operationalized. And so this, what you're going to get here is something clear, tangible, impactful, and what types of things can be expected from your program. So what I hope you can see is how these two things play off each other and how they can sort of serve together to bring in this why and this how. So I brought up one that I really like for you. This is from MIT, and this is from their AODS office, their Alcohol and Other Drug Services office. So the vision to promote a culture of well-being at MIT by preventing the negative consequences of students' alcohol and other drug abuse. Their mission to provide effective education, prevention, and intervention programs to reduce the negative impact of alcohol and other drug abuse on the MIT community. So what you see in the mission is we are going to prevent the negative consequences. That is the ideal state. The mission being, well, what we're going to do is educate, prevent, intervene programmatically to reduce negative impact. And so you can see sort of the differences there, and what MIT kind of chose to do in being able to articulate their how and their why. And the reason that I put this all in front of you is I sometimes think it's hard to make decisions when you don't have a clear how and why. It's hard to make a call, whether it's, what strategy are we going to use? What tools that are available to us are we going to invest in? How are we going to spend our money, right? Like, all of these things sort of need to tie back to something. And there are lots of things that can tie back to, but your how and your why should be a significant piece of that. So let's see. I don't know if I can see the chat. Maybe I can. I'm good at a lot of things, not great at technology, but we'll see if we can do this. Want to just hear from you a little bit. So your office or department, whoever's doing the substance misuse work, do you have a vision and mission statement? Does it actually name substance use, or is it more general around well-being or health? Let's start there with those two questions. Do folks mind sharing in the chat? So some people I'm seeing, the divisions, maybe student affairs as an example, might have a mission statement. Mental health, yep. So if you got to write your own, if you got to build something that specifically addressed these types of issues and concerns, when you think about the vision, when you think about something aspirational, what words come to mind? When you think about the mission, something concrete, what words come to mind? Mental health, well-being, support, connection. Supportive, resourceful, comprehensive, reducing harm, absolutely. Awesome. So what, part of the why for us is because we know that substance use is a part of the college experience. Now, you will hear me say in a little bit that it's not a part of everybody's experience, but for some of our students, it is. And so it is something that we can build around, have interventions and programs and strategies to address. And so one of the first things we need to do is just get a high level sense of what we're seeing. And the way that we're going to do that is through some of the most recent data from the ACHA and CHA3, so from 2023 to 2024. And we're going to stay 30,000 feet right now. We're going to talk pretty generally, and then I've got some key takeaways for us to consider, but just want to expose you to this. Now, as I do that, I also want you to know that everything I'm about to show you is available free on their ACHA website. It's from the executive summary of the 2023-2024 National Data Bank. And so you can dive through it. There's so much there. Obviously, the executive summary is a little bit easier to understand than the larger report. The larger report's there too. And so you have access to, nationally, what are these issues looking like? Everything from substance use to mental health, to everything in between. And so something for you to consider if you have not seen it before. And so just want to point out that resource. So the first kind of piece that they show around substance use in the executive summary is sort of about kind of substance use ever, right? Now, as you know, depending on the assessment tool we're using, sometimes people use the past 2 weeks of behavior as predictive, the past 30 days of behavior as predictive, and this the NCHA does a little bit of both. You'll see that in a bit. But this is ever used, and so at no surprise, I don't think, you'll see that alcohol is most prevalent, followed by cannabis and then by nicotine. And then the other thing that I really want to point out on this particular slide is how low everything else is. I definitely think that there are obviously some specific considerations for different campuses. Like I'll say for my campus out in Western Massachusetts, we have seen a much more significant hit from the opioid epidemic than maybe the city of Boston, right? It's just different contextually. But overall, nationally, those are less than what we see within alcohol, cannabis, and nicotine. Now, when we think about identification of risk, this uses the assist. And what the assist does is it asks a series of questions and it puts you in potentially a moderate risk of use or a high risk of use. And so what you'll see here is actually that nicotine and cannabis are some of the higher risk in the moderate and slightly in the high risk areas as well, based on this particular assessment, which I don't think is all that surprising. I know that the landscape around around cannabis rather, is changing pretty rapidly, and so I think that that's a data point we're going to have to pay attention to over time. This just looks at prescription misuse. Again, the point being is it's low. I definitely think that there's something to be said for, things like stimulants or sleeping pills or opioids. And one thing I'm going to ask you in a bit is like, what contextually matters to you in your campus, right? Because maybe it is stimulants, maybe it is opioids, like here in my home campus, right? It's different for everybody, but nationally, fairly low. So tobacco and nicotine is really interesting because we're looking at use over the last 3 months. And, there have been for many, many years movements to address nicotine use on college campuses, probably the most significant being tobacco-free campuses, right? And yet if you look at the data sort of from far away, with the sort of introduction of e-cigarettes, we're seeing just the nicotine related data look a little bit different. And so definitely something for us to consider as we think about prevention, strategy, intervention, etc. So getting into a little bit around alcohol, what I want to point out about this graph here, it's about number of drinks consumed when the student drank alcohol in a social setting, is that the vast majority drank 4 or fewer drinks. So what that's telling us is that that most respondents of this particular survey were drinking 4 or fewer drinks in that social setting. Now, while that is a significant percentage, there are populations who are at higher risk for heavy episodic drinking that we need to pay attention to. A very specific one, as an example, is the literature is it's quite strong around student athletes, maybe having higher rates of binge drinking than others. So then we think about 5 or more drinks, right? So now we're sort of excluding everybody who had that 4 or more. So a reported number of times students consumed 5 or more drinks in a sitting, and this one's in the last 2 weeks. So what you'll see here is some data around this idea of heavy episodic drinking or binge drinking. But the other piece that I want to call your attention to is I did not drink alcohol in the last 2 weeks, which includes non-drinkers being our most significant percentage here. And we're going to talk more about non-drinkers in a second. So what happens? What are their experiences in the last 12 months when drinking alcohol? So what are some of the negative impacts that have happened for our students? And a couple that I want to call out. One is regret, right? And I actually think regret, if you look down the list, regret can be an umbrella to almost all of these things. I have a regret and I got in trouble with the police. I regret a sexual interaction that I had. I regret hurting someone else, right? I actually think that that sort of piece around regret, it can probably be pretty broad as far as a student's general experience when maybe drinking. And then the next really two are the blackouts and the brownouts. Brownout being slightly more significant, what we call Swiss cheese thinking, right? Like maybe you have some memory, but some of it's gone as well. You can recall if there are sort of cues or someone's reminding you of things, but you sort of have these kind of spurts of memory and then some pieces that are missing. The blackout being a large period of time that you can't remember. Important for us to address these things and important for us for a lot of reasons. But I think that there's work that we're doing on college campuses, particularly around Title IX, around teaching our students about incapacitation. And what we're seeing here is that it's something that they deal with. And so how do we talk about it in a way that resonates for them? And maybe this concept of blackout and brownout is a way to think about that. So then we've got the non-user snapshot. I really wanted to point this out because I think that, one gap that I often see on campuses when we think about the hows and whys of our work, when we think about an overall substance misuse strategy, is we basically can look at this group of non-drinkers or students in recovery and just say, oh, they're good. Let's put them over here in this corner over here. And we don't program for them. We don't offer supports for them. We don't, create a community that supports, any of the proactive or protective pieces of the work of the sort of choices that they're making, right? And so wanted to show you this because this talks a little bit about students in recovery up at the top there. So you'll see those percentages. And then there's 2 other pieces here. When, if ever, was the last time you drank alcohol or used cannabis? And I want you to take a look at, first of all, the never bar right at the top, with a significant amount of folks reporting that they have never used a substance. And then again, if we think about what type of indicator we're looking at, right? Is 2 weeks indicative? Is 30 days indicative? You'll see as this chart moves down, within the last 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks ago, more than 30 days ago, more than 3 months ago, more than 12 months ago, you'll see how that data changes. And so what this is telling us is that there is a population of non-users on our campus, and we need to make sure that within our substance abuse or misuse strategy, that they are present in the work that we're doing. So what do we know, right? A quick 30,000-foot summary of what we just shared. Students are primarily using alcohol, cannabis, and nicotine, and to be honest, I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's important to pay attention to variances based around gender, particularly any disproportionate impacts based around gender. One of those is that women and trans and gender nonconforming folks are most likely drinking 4 drinks or fewer in a social setting, and men drinking more. Rates of non-drinkers or students in recovery are significant and should be addressed, as we just talked about. And students are struggling with brownouts, blackouts, and regret. And if we know that those are the experiences that they're having, how can we use that knowledge to best help them and intervene? So a little bit around what we know. So let me ask you this. Does that reflect where you are? When you read that data, would that be how you would expect a student at your institution to answer the survey? Or what might be more unique to you? Like I had shared, my campus has different experiences around harm reduction and opioids than other campuses that I've been at previously. And it's just a matter of our context. And so tell me what you think about what you just saw and if it resonates for you. Yeah, majority commuter campus absolutely looks different. Community colleges look different, two-year programs look different, absolutely, absolutely. And place and space matters, like where does substance use occur, right? Um, yep, rise in nicotine use, yep, stimulants and depressants, yep, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so I'm excited to talk a little bit about this idea of a needs assessment because Um, I think that I'm going to explain to you in sort of towards the end of the presentation, some intervention ideas, some things you can try. But, a colleague of mine many, many years ago said something to the effect of tools without strategy equals tragedy, right? And what I love about a proper needs assessment is that it lays out exactly the direction in which you need to go. They're so good and comprehensive at identifying gaps, at identifying risk, at identifying protective factors and things that are going well and opportunities. And they create the strategy. And then we can figure out what tools or do we need to enact that strategy. But a needs assessment is a great place to start. So a couple of things that you want to consider, and this would actually be before you even put a needs assessment into place, right? A couple of things you want to do. One is this concept of social listening and community engagement. And what I want to sort of point out here is the difference between community health and population level health, right? So typically, population level health is when some kind of expert comes in, makes an assessment of a population, and makes recommendations based on that assessment. Community health is actually when folks facilitate the community themselves, the people who are being impacted, to help make decisions in their own health, right? And so community health is actually much more in line with the work we all do in health promotion on college campuses than population level health is. And so a part of that community health movement is listening to the folks who are impacted by the work. So for us, how do we hear from students? Right? What are your experiences? What are you worried about? What goes well? How do you stay safe? Like all of those pieces matter. So social listening and community engagement. Organize and plan. I don't know how many of you have actually done a needs assessment on your campus, but if you do one well, they are not a small chore. And so make sure that you have a plan, you're ready to be organized. You can use a team for sure. The one thing I would recommend is that there is like a point person. There is someone who will be a decision maker at the end of the day, who's sort of the leading the orchestra, if you will. And so I would identify that person to help bring the collective together. You want to go back to this idea of visioning, right? So when we're thinking about a needs assessment, we don't want to be assessing based on, let's say, compliance. Are we doing the bare minimum? I mean, I suppose we could ask that question, but what if we ask the question, are we meeting our vision? How close are we to our ideal? How close are we to our aspirations, right? Let's think about that question. And then there's this concept of readiness. So I don't know how many of you have seen this before, the Triethnic Center for Prevention Research, but they have this really wonderful community readiness assessment that I would absolutely recommend any team coming together to do a needs assessment, that you do you work through this framework first. And so you'll see here that through sort of a variety of assessments, you're able to kind of see where you are in sort of these stages of readiness, which gives you an idea of where you need to go, right? So you'll see everything here from having absolutely no awareness of an issue, a gap, a liability, whatever that awareness piece might be, all the way up through community ownership. This is our problem. We're going to fix it. This is important, whatever, right? And so I love this tool because it's something that can help you identify, like, what are the easy wins? You know, where are our eights and nines? Where are people on board from a readiness perspective? And then we've got the harder ones, right? We've got the ones where, maybe there's denial or lack of awareness or big awareness, and we have some work to do in
Yeah,
order to get
even
that
if it wasn't me, it should be me
So-
considering.
something to consider. I think somebody needs to mute, if that's okay. All right. So what does the needs assessment look like? 9 easy steps here for you. So the first piece that we do is we articulate a purpose. So why are you doing a needs assessment? What are you trying to answer? What are the questions? And again, maybe this ties back to our vision and our aspirations, right? Why are we doing this? Then you think about the who. So what are your demographics? Who are you hoping to learn about? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. What are our limitations data-wise? What don't we know? So a great example is we have any electronic health record here in both our counseling and our health services. And, we're able to we're able to disaggregate a lot of data. So pull data based on class year or race, ethnicity, gender, all these pieces. And one kind of ask we continue to get was around student athletes. And the systems that we use didn't indicate if a student was a student athlete or not. And so without going back and literally counting, a hand like one by one, that was not something that we could easily tell from the data. And so we had to understand it as a limitation and figure out what to do with the fact that we had that limitation in front of us. So that's just an example. Then a data discussion and interpretation. So how do we make sense of what we know, right? A data point on a graph is very different than the stories that go with them, right? And so what is the story behind the data? When you say that 16 students were hospitalized for, and issues around alcohol, what are the stories? What were the circumstances? What maybe made those 16 cases at higher risk than others? In what ways were those students helped? Were there bystanders? Were there friends? Like what are the stories, and how do we use those stories to learn? Which really leads us to this next part around behaviors. What are our students doing? I think, what really comes to mind for me when I see that one is, I remember being on a campus, like a couple campuses ago at this point, and we learned, let's stick with student athletes for a second, we learned that it was far less likely for a student athlete to request medical attention for another athlete who might need it related to substance use. And there were issues around what coach would know and find out. There were issues around, blue and red lights being in front of your residence hall. There were issues around losing playing time. And there were a greater sense of issues for athletes than if the person that they needed to call for help was not an athlete. And so we had to understand our students' behavior in that regard and then figure out, as we move forward, what is the strategy and intervention to address that? So then we have the consequences. So let's go back to that story. The consequences is that more student athletes at this particular campus were not receiving medical care when in a medical emergency. And so how do we understand that issue and what is its impact? What are the risk factors? So, what are the things that are increasing the likelihood of risk? And then what are the protective factors? What decreases the likelihood of risk on campus? And then the environmental factors. So what is our relevant context? So, are you an urban campus? Are you a suburban campus? Are you a dry campus? What's your residential situation? Are you a 2-year? Are you a 4-year? All these pieces matter, right? And so when we think about a comprehensive needs assessment, these are the 9 pillars that you should be exploring. Putting these things together, creating this kind of design to help you figure out where are you in any given moment. So once you've done that, right, you've gathered all your data, you've made sense of your data, you've explored what you know, what you don't, you've been able to talk about risk, all this stuff. What do? Well, the first thing you do is you create a plan. You identify your gaps and liabilities. You identify your strengths and protective factors as well. And you think about, well, what do we do now, right? So you develop a plan, and we'll talk a little bit about some strategies that might be helpful for you in just a moment. You need to communicate with your community. We remember how we talked about community health? One of those pieces is telling people what you learn. I have, in many times in my career, have requested data from certain groups of students, right? And one thing that I practice is I give the data back. So let's say that you reach out to like the sort of QSU, the Queer Student Union, right? And you say, hey, I've got the NCHA running next week. I would love if you could push out reminders for your club members to take the survey. And one thing that I will say is, and you know what, when I get the results, I'll come back to your a club meeting and tell you more about your health, about, the different experiences that you reported having, and that gonna brainstorm with you what we can do next. That communication piece is so essential. And the reason why is it actually builds trust. I can't tell you, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room who thinks this. I can't tell you how many students I've talked to about taking a survey, particularly a large scale survey, and their attitude is, well, no one looks at that anyway, and I never know what happens. No, nothing ever changes, right? We need to tell the story. Then we assess and evaluate, and we build resources to meet those needs of the health improvement plan that you see above. So lots of different things to do when we think about that needs assessment. So we're going right back here, and you see a lot of pieces about information that we need to gather, right? There are things that we need to find, to cultivate. And there's ways we can do that, right? When we think about substance misuse, large scale surveys is definitely a huge opportunity. That being said, you want to be really careful about response rates and disaggregating data versus looking at data simply in the aggregate, those types of pieces. Other places to get data might be your conduct reports. What are they seeing in the residence halls or through the police departments? If you do the basics program, there are, I imagine, just because I've been a basics provider for many years, talk about stories, right? Like there are experiences within those meetings that can really influence the work that you do from a needs assessment perspective. And then I put screening tools on here as well. And I love this idea of screening tool because it's an interaction that could take 90 seconds, and you could screen 100, 200, 300 students a day and get that 30,000-foot view that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. And so lots of different ways to get the data that you're looking for. And if you look at this list, I could imagine getting 4 very different stories about one campus from these 4 sources. Important to know. I just wanted to provide you with this as well. These are just some examples of screening tools. We won't go through all of them, but what you'll see here is the substance type that it assesses for, who it's meant for, adults or adolescents, and then if it can be self-administered or clinician administered. I know this is being recorded, happy to share slides if you want to actually take a look at some of these specific screenings themselves. So we've got some for opioids, tobacco, alcohol, etc. So just wanted to make sure you had those for to take a look at later on. So what do you do? right? So we've got the strategy. We've done our needs assessment, we've done our homework, we have our mission and vision guiding us. We have a health improvement plan to figure out where to go. What are some different things we can do? Well, what we need to do first is create a really sort of robust substance misuse approach. And we want to make sure that there are pieces of our approach that are both, preventative and promoting of behaviors that we're hoping to see, but also support recovery and treatment for students who might be struggling. And that's what you see here is this, what we call the IOM Institute of Medicine protractor. And so we've really got three big sections, right? You've kind of got the treatment recovery section, which is really the direct care work that we're doing. You've got the prevention section, which is how to make not so good things happen less. And then you've got the promotion section, which is how to make the good things happen more, right? And all of those pieces need to work together to create a comprehensive program. Now, there are some sort of things out there, and I'll show you a few that we know work, right? But I will say one of the really exciting pieces about wellness work, well-being work on college campuses is that it's kind of a playground right now. There's so much to try and innovate and do. And so I wanted to introduce you to this as well. This is from Nation, and it's these principles of an effective prevention program. And so if you are building something on your own, if you are starting from, a blank slate and you want to build an intervention that specifically meets the needs as described in your needs assessment within the context of your institution, this is a great place to start. To think about, okay, this program I'm building, does it have these 9 pieces in it? Because if it does, it's probably more likely to be successful. So I wanted you to have to sort of get access to this as well, because it helps us build new things, which is incredibly fun. So I won't spend too much time just going over some ideas, but wanted to just share with you some. And so when we think about our individual strategies, things that we do at the intra and interpersonal level, PFIs, so personalized feedback, individual skills training, basics, universal screenings. So one thing I'll say about that one is, put something, I mean, I'm sure this is the same for most campuses, but out of all the health offices, our health services, our nurses and our doctors, they see the most students. And what if every appointment a student got an audit or a QDIT screening? And it just got, they got feedback maybe in the moment. But we were able to say, like I know I'm at a very small institution, and our health services had over 400 appointments this past semester. That would have been excellent data, right? So, and also an excellent opportunity for those students to learn, and to use those screenings as an educational piece too. So just wanted to throw that out there. And then we talked about recovery as well. We should also be doing things at the community and selective levels. So a couple things that we know are valuable. Food, and making sure that our students have access to food. I know that I've seen on many campuses some, movements around the hours that dining halls are open. The ability to take food out of the dining hall is sometimes contentious on campuses, right? So things that we can advocate for in regards to our students and their care. Thinking about places where your students are drinking more. So thinking about parties like social host or sporting events or tailgates might be really helpful. Then thinking about some different ways we can change attitudes and behaviors. Social norms, bystander intervention, these are great examples of this. Like I said, we want to have some substance-free programming options, particularly those Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, right? We want to make sure that if you are not a user, you've got somewhere to go. And then that feels like an equitable experience for you. Couple of partnerships that might be valuable, working with folks who throw parties to make sure that food and water is available. I've seen really successful partnerships with ride shares like Uber, to help get the students around without driving. Work with your parents and families. They're wonderful partners, particularly for their first year students that they're dropping off, because believe it or not, our students want to hear from their parents about this stuff. So be a partner in prevention with them. Police department and community policing, drug disposal, and we talked about screening days. And then we've got this like environmental stuff, like this universal stuff, these prevention efforts that apply to everybody in your community. And a couple that we can point out here, certainly enforcing the drinking age. If you do sell alcohol on campus, when looking at your policies, your biannual reviews, having an amnesty policy in place. One of my favorites is partnering with local restaurants, bars, and other agencies. One, to kind of put them on a coalition or a group for you to talk, especially if you're a more urban campus, like what is their experience with your students? But also they can do things like, let's say your biggest drinking nights are Thursday and Saturday. Well, maybe they can offer half off appetizers or something, right? Like there are ways that they can contribute to prevention strategy. Um, one of my favorites, one of my students' least favorites, is have classes on Fridays, right? Like be able to put something there so that the students have a place and space to go. And then again, you'll see some other tips here as well. So I'm curious, I know I just threw a ton at you, but what of any of those have you tried? Have they worked? Or were any of those new to you? And you're like, oh man, that might really work on my campus. And really what I want to kind of go back to in this is I just threw what 30 strategies at you. They all need to tie back to the needs assessment, which ties back to the mission and vision, right? And the data. So all of those pieces kind of streamline together to decide what intervention do we pick anyway. And I just gave you a sampling of a few. So if anybody wants to check in the chat, well, you're more than welcome to. All right, well, I know we're running to time, so I want to show you a couple other things. So if you want to get started, if this is a conversation that you're like, hey, I think our community is ready for something like this. I want to introduce you to the College AIM from the NIAAA, which maybe you've seen before, maybe you haven't. But it's a helpful resource and place to get started. The College AIM has this strategy planning worksheet, which I provided here in my slides, but you can easily download online for yourself. And you can get a sense of what you're doing, how to balance your priorities with effectiveness. And then you can also see through College AIM what strategies they promote and why they promote them. So, they say that, X strategy works because of, maybe controlled studies or, things like that. And so it'll help you plan. So if you've never seen this before, it's a really, really great place to start. So a couple of takeaways that I kind of want to leave you with before we open up, just to kind of hear from folks. Some things that you can do: develop a vision, mission, and strategy, right? We should be doing our work for a reason, and there are so many ways to define the why. I think we do a lot of the how. I think we do less of the why, and so find your why. Understand national trends, but do pay particular attention to your specific campus and remember to disaggregate your data. It is really easy to see large data sets and to look at the experience of the typical student. But I want to challenge us to move beyond what the typical student, meaning the populations that most frequently answer the survey. We need to disaggregate and look at all of our communities in as much detail as possible. If you don't know the answer to a question, again, in the needs assessment, if you remember, there was that block that said, what don't we know? Ask. It's a great place to start. Talk to your campus about readiness. I've definitely seen communities where the folks in maybe roles like ours are super ready. Like this is like, let's press the gas pedal, let's go. And others are not. And so it creates some tension. So engage around readiness. And then a couple sort of things we should balance when we think about those strategies coming into play are certainly personal use behaviors, community norms, and then those environmental factors as well. So it is 1:52. I'm pretty proud of myself for getting through all of those slides in that time. I'm going to stop showing my slides and then would love to open it up for any conversation. and see what's on people's minds.
May I just ask a question? Okay. Um, I think the primary thing we struggle with, so I'm at a community college near St. Louis, is we're not completely sure about the effectiveness of what we do. And when we do assess things, but the issue is we have to incentivize every single thing to even get students to show up and participate. It's like we need to have food, we need to have giveaways. So I'm just, you know, I guess I wonder if other schools or other people are having success getting students to do things without feeling like we're bribing them to do things or participate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to throw the question out to the room, but a couple of thoughts. One is, um, you know, uh, there's nothing wrong with providing incentives. Like, these are busy human beings, and if they'll do it for a t-shirt and you can get them a t-shirt, all right, cool. But the other piece I'll throw out there, and it goes back to that conversation we were having about building trust, right? So because the core is, why would you give me your data? Why would you tell me your stories? Why would you share with me your experiences? What is it? What's in it for you? And for some, maybe it's the free piece of pizza or the t-shirt. But for others, it's about what we sort of do with that information. How are we good stewards of data, right? And what are different ways outside of incentives that we can make it worth it? And that's probably really community specific, but I think it's a question worth asking, and being like, what would make you do this survey if I didn't have anything to give to you? What would be valuable? What I'm going to venture to guess is change. Show me you can change. Show me that you'll do something with my information. Show me that you're able to be nimble. Show me that you're able to provide adequate resources, all that stuff. But really curious, other folks in the room, I know our pizza budgets are probably through the roof, but other thoughts that come up for folks? Okay. Anything else? All right, Annabelle, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, perfect. I was just checking the chat. I don't see anything in there. But thank you for that information. And those are some really great perspectives that I know I've got some of my advisory board members on this call that we can just chat about and have those deeper conversations about implementing more of a, I guess, meaningful conversation with how we integrate data. That's something I think will be really useful for our campuses in Illinois. And as I said, for those that need the CEU link, I'll be sending that out again because I get a copy of like the registration list. So don't worry if you didn't get it in the chat link there. And then if you need resources, have questions about the different links or screening tools that Ashleigh mentioned, I usually have a list of them, or I can ask her vice versa, and we can get those to you as well as that slide deck. So we'll have those probably by the end of the afternoon. I'll have them posted on the website, and I will send you guys an update, with your eval, the slide deck, hey, here's references that we brought up. So yeah, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me and I can connect you with who you need to get in touch with.
Thank you so much.